Hi, I'm Mike Fanelli, and we're here at Camp Ransburg in southern Indiana at the OA field. There's the arch entranceway in the back. Today we're going to talk about fire by friction, and specifically about thunderheads, or the bearing that goes on top of the spindle. There's a lot of different ways to do that. It's confusing, and so we thought we would share some ideas, some things that we've found and seen other people do to help scouts and people working on fire by friction to come up with some options for thunderheads, or top block bearings as they're sometimes called. So here's a little bit of display of some of the different items that we're going to be talking about. And typically here at camp, what the scouts do is they'll, for that top bearing block, so the top bearing block is what the spindle goes into, and you put your hand on and the spindle spins. So the important thing about the top bearing block, or thunderhead, is that it needs to be made from a very, very hard wood. So what are the hardwoods in the forest in this area in southern Indiana? The hardest wood that can be found is Osage orange. Osage orange. It has this kind of a yellow color to it on the inside, and sometimes the roots are orange, and it's kind of easy to find, and they have hedge apples, or monkey brains as some kids call them, and so that's how you know how to find an Osage orange tree. And probably the second hardest wood in the forest is dogwood, and so dogwood's the second hardest wood, generally speaking, and then maybe something in the ironwood family or American hornbeam family would be maybe third in line, and possibly fourth would be walnut, and fifth something like oak or hickory. So it's important to have really, really hard wood. Why is that important? Well, you want the top bearing to slip and not get hot. You want it to spin freely, and you want minimal contact. So you can see, possibly if with a close-up, that divot in the bearing block is much bigger than the tip of the spindle, so that when we put the two together, there's very little side drag. Maybe there's even just point contact right there at the top. That helps to reduce friction, because we want all of the energy to be going down here where the heat is supposed to be generated. We don't want both the fireboard and the bearing block to be getting hot. We only want the fireboard to be getting hot. And so typically what scouts will do here at camp, they'll find a hard piece of wood. A branch like this is probably about right, something that fits conveniently in the palm of your hand. Usually they're bigger, they don't have to be, but I'm looking for something that's going to fit in the palm of my hand like this. So we'd split it and take one of the two halves and start working a hole in that, either with a knife. Sometimes I've seen scouts take the corner of an axe and grind it like this, very carefully, to get it started. And you can use your knife, and it takes a while, it takes some patience to get that divot ground in there, so don't give up on that. Probably the deeper it is, I'm going to guess it needs to be at least a 1/4 inch deep, and very wide angled, very wide angled. So I'm looking upside down. Instead of being like this, wider is better, so that the contact point is just right up there in that cone for the spindle. And so this is the way we'd typically do it here at camp. It's probably the easiest way, but it may not be the best. But one thing that will help this to be successful, to reduce friction, is to find some kind of lubrication to put inside of the bearing block. And so there are various types of leaves around that have a little bit of oil in them. So this is a sassafras tree, sassafras leaf. You can see that this one has, we call that kind of a 3-fingered, and then there's a 2-fingered, and there's a 1-fingered sassafras, and it smells really good. And sometimes the scouts chew it up and spit that into the divot, And we're not sure, we're not convinced that that's the best way, but what we're trying to do is get the oil out of the leaf, get some lubrication. There's another leaf in the woods called spice bush, and it smells really good also. It smells like spice. You can chew that up or just compact it. Probably, in my opinion, the better way is to just compact the leaf into the bearing block and squish it in with the spindle to get some of that oily juice in there, so we have some lubrication. And then take this out when you're done. Maybe leave a little bit in, and we want that to be nice and slippery. So that works pretty good, but in my opinion, and others we've talked to, there's even a better, there's two other options. Of course, right here along your nose, you have natural oil on your skin. I've seen scouts and scout leaders take their top of their spindle and get some oil off their nose, or if they have greasy hair, you can take some of that grease off your head if you haven't showered for a while. Get some grease that way. But in my opinion, a better way around camp here is to find one of these leaves, a walnut leaf. And somewhere near that walnut leaf, depending on the time of year, we'll be growing a walnut. So these are just beginning to grow. It's early summer here at Ransburg. And so, as you know, walnuts will get to be this big. The bigger ones are better, but these also have walnut oil in them in the husk. And so what we do is sometimes we'll take our knives and get some of that husk. Get some of this husk material. We're not interested in the nut so much as we are the husk, because that's where the oil is. And then compress that down into there and squeeze some of that oil into down in there and get that good and slippery. I can feel that it's really got slippery real quick there just in doing that. So look around for some walnut husk for lubrication. So that's one trick that we've learned. And that works pretty good. And maybe even a better next step thing is to look for fat wood. Fat wood? What is fat wood? Well, strangely enough, when a pine tree dies, all of the sap runs down to the bottom of the trunk of the tree and into the branches. So this is a branch that was sticking out of the side of a pine tree and has all that pitch in it, all that sap. And it smells really good. And it turns out to be this is really, really hard. And that sap in there helps to lubricate. So if you were to convert that into a thunderhead like this, you could cut it in half. Here's what it looked like before. And that's what it'll look like growing out of the side of the tree, the branch. If you can split that and then bore your divot in there, this works really nice. It's self-lubricated. Fat wood comes from pine trees. Maybe even better than that, though, are rocks. Rocks! Most people aren't aware that rock makes a good thunderhead. And so what you can do is walk along the creek bed, and eventually you might find a rock that already has a divot in it. Something like that. It's a good start. Here's one that's been worked. And so when I say worked, and find usually where limestone grows, which is what this is made of, there's also a hard rock called flint. It's shiny like this. It's what the Native Americans made arrowheads into. And sometimes you can find a sharp corner of this flint or quartz like this, and you can use it. You can see real quickly, you can see how I'm grinding away the powder coming off there. Getting that divot smoothed out. So when you find it, it'll probably not be perfect, but if you work it with a hard rock like flint, you can make a nice divot as well. So look for those along stream beds, and look for the hard quartz that just so happens to be near it. Another way is to actually use a tool. this is a chisel. You can take a chisel if you want to. This may not be the pioneer way or the frontiersman way. Perhaps they had hardened steel. I suspect they would. But you can take this chisel and grind a chisel. This one's been ground with a chisel. Or, here again, the corner of an axe. I'm getting quite a bit of powder coming out of that. I'll show that to you. And then usually when you get working with that and your spindle in there, it glazes up and gets really hard and smooth. Here's another nice one that fits nicely in the palm of your hand. I think this is even a piece of granite. It's very hard. It works. You can't get it real deep because it's a real hard rock. But that one has been found to work very well. And here's another interesting thing that might work. This is a crinoid fossil. And it's a very hard rock from limestone. And we're thinking that with some work, it could become a really nice, maybe we'd have to smooth it up a little bit, get the corners out. And it might make a pretty nice bearing block or thunderhead, like that. And then if you happen to have some chapstick with you, chapstick is a really nice lubricant. You could put some chapstick down into the thunderhead for lubrication, or anything else that's oily that you might have. Maybe if there's a dead animal around that's underneath the hide is the oil and grease of the animal. That's another thing that the Native Americans probably used. So there's lots of different options. And here's a clever idea that my friend Brad Duncan came up with. I think you might have seen it on the internet. He took his fixed blade knife, which scouts typically aren't allowed to carry, but maybe when you're an adult you can do this. And he has embedded a bearing, a miniature bearing, into the handle of his sheath knife, and that becomes his thunderhead. It's really slippery, really free. And I believe these are available on the internet. They come in various sizes. So that's a little bit of background and history about different ideas and types of thunderheads. And we're going to do a little demonstration and play around here with some of these thunderheads and see if we can get a fire by friction. Thank you so much. We'll be right back.
Okay, buddy. All right. What's wrong, bud? Hey. Gee.
So here we are across the roadside from the horse ranch here at Camp Ransburg, and we found a spice bush. We want to show you what it looks like. It's a real plain leaf. It's a nice soft leaf, and right here's the berry starting to form. It's early summer. That'll be red later in the year. And if you rub some of this on your fingers, it smells real minty, spicy. So that's good for lubricating your thunderhead. There's a lot of it around camp here. Spice bush. And so we found a sassafras tree right across from our campsite. It has all three of the varieties of leaves. The three-petaled leaf, the mitten, two-petaled leaf, and the single leaf. And if you rub it, it gets a really nice smell to it. And the Native Americans and the pioneers made sassafras tea from the roots of this plant. But here at Ransburg, the scouts chew it or grind it up into their thunderheads and use that for lubrication for their thunderheads. So this is a black walnut tree. You can see it has, this is actually the entire leaf. These are leaflets, and this time of year in early summer you'll see the beginnings of walnuts forming. the older they get, the greasier they get, and the better the lubrication they are. There's a little bit of oil in these, but the later ones, especially when in the fall where they're really greasy, they're really good for lubricating thunderheads and bearing blocks. So that's what we're looking for around camp, something to give us lubrication so that our spindles don't get hot on the top.
My buddy Mike Fanelli and I are at Camp Ransburg today at the OA Ordeal area, having a little bit of fun playing fire by friction. I've got one of Mike's stone thunderheads that he's already lubricated with a little bit of a walnut husk, a baby walnut husk. And my kit, I've got red elm fireboard and spindle. That is pretty typical of what's available here at Camp Ransburg. And my bird's nest is some white pine needles and some of the inner bark of a cottonwood tree. And you can see we've been practicing a little bit, burning in our notches, burning in our divots. All right, here goes. And by the way, I'm using Danny Coderre's bow. He's a firecrafter with Troop 516, and in fact, I think Danny got this bow from his older brother Andrew, also a firecrafter with Troop 516. Boy, I hope this works for them. All right. There we go. Outstanding thunderhead. Can't get any better than that. Just in case you were wondering, poison ivy does not make a good thunderhead lubricant. Just say no.